think I can.
Here we are. So, hello everyone. I'm here with Danny Duchamp, Libertyverse, and Todd Lewis, and we're going to be discussing the role of government within society and sort of having a general debate because we have a number of various beliefs on what that role is, ranging from presumably anarcho-capitalism to libertarianism to distributism. Who is echoing? Oh, I'm playing it in the background, sorry. So I think to start off, we're going to go around and say generally what we view the role of government should be. To start off with me, I would almost call myself a confederationist instead of a federalist, in that I generally would like power to be as decentralized as possible, as localized as possible. I think the difference between having a federal state and a confederal state is that in a federal state, the subdivisions, as in the states within the United States, are still subservient to the federal government, whereas in a confederation like Switzerland, the constituent cantons and states are actually superior in terms of ultimate power to the central government. And effectively, I'd like everything except for foreign policy, and maybe I might even decentralize the military, but everything to be in the hands of local and state governments. I'd even be okay with each state having its own currency, because I think one of the best ways to prevent tyranny is to make the decisions that affect you made on the most local level possible, and give people the option of where they want to live. If they want to live in a very conservative traditional Christian community, they should have the option, and they should also have the option if they wanted to, like, say, live in a secular liberal community. And I'd say as well, if the ultimate interest is in preventing a tyrannical government, having a moral and just people is also a very, very effective way of doing that. Such as, in the fact, is if you have a very strong family structure, there's no real need to have a welfare state in which the government becomes the surrogate father for single mothers. And if you have an ethical and morally good people, you're gonna have a reduced crime rate, and people will exercise a lot more restraint, and there won't be nearly as much need for an oppressive, internalized police state. And I think that largely comes from having a spiritual and moral foundation of your society. So I think Libertyverse, would you like to go next?
Sure. Okay, so I would be described as an ANCAP, an anarcho-capitalist. I base what basically the political philosophy is. I want law to reflect morality, and the way libertarians or ANCAPs derive morality is through the axiom of the self-ownership principle, which is you own yourself, you own your labor, you own the fruits thereof, and basically ownership would be the authority to exclude or include others from a certain property. And from that, we derive the non-aggression principle, basically taking self-ownership to logical consistency. If you own yourself and your labor and the fruits thereof, then that means you can't own someone else's. So basically, it's advocating for a voluntary economy. That's another word to call us as voluntarist. I think, as far as the proper role of government, we, contrary to maybe some misconceptions, we do believe that there should be law, just no state. And as I define state, it would be an institution that systemizes aggression or the initiation of force. So there can be groups coexisting, working together, as long as there isn't systemized initiation of force. And that's, just the skeletal basics of anarcho-capitalism.
All right, Todd Lewis, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I would agree with a lot of what Fritz said, not necessarily all of it, but I would say that the role of government is laid out in Romans 13 to punish the wicked and protect the righteous. The fear of over-centralized authority and tyranny is very important, but one of the problems that I see with having too limited of a central government by devolving too much to the Confederate level is you can't defend yourself. I mean, the French revolutionaries kind of raffle stomped the Swiss in the 18th and 19th centuries when they didn't have a strong central government. So it's sort of a balancing act, kind of an Aristotelian golden mean, not too much and not too little, depending on the circumstances.
Okay. And I guess, Danny, would you like to lay out your views?
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of what both you yourself, Fritz, said and what Libertyverse said. I'm not sure I could necessarily agree with Todd on the religiously based argument there, but in terms of the anarcho-capitalists, I tend to agree with anarcho-capitalism a lot. Not that I would ever consider myself one, but just that I think on the ethics, it is essentially right. I think that any act of government is inherently an act of force, and that there is some moral negative in enacting force upon someone. The only place that I disagree is that I sometimes think of government as a necessary evil. I think that there are some situations in which it is justified to enact force because the positive benefits of it outweigh the negatives. So I suppose I think the ends can justify the means. That was a good way of looking at it. Additionally, with what you were saying, Fritz, about distributing government, about making sure that it's not too centralized, because if power is concentrated in one place, you can have a tyrannical government start to emerge. I'd agree with that. And I would also go so far as to say the ideal way of governing is self-governing. The more you can distribute it, the better, and distributing it right down to the individual, well, that would be ideal then, wouldn't it?
All right. I think it's nice that we've laid out, and I think sort of I think we can start out by addressing everybody else's the points of everybody else. And I think critiquing each other's views would be a good way of starting it. And I'd say, as a general criticism of anarcho-capitalism, to pick on Libertyverse first, I would say that. And I sort of wanted to start this conversation after I made my video on anarcho-capitalism, and my main criticism of it is that I'm confused, or I don't really understand how individuals who are incapable of self-defense are supposed to fit in within an anarcho-capitalist system. So, and the four groups I sort of laid out were namely children, the elderly, homeless people, and the disabled. So in a sense, how are you supposed to ensure that children aren't exploited and abused in an anarcho-capitalist system under these basic premises of self-ownership? Because yes, children are people as well, but they certainly don't have the same capabilities as fully grown adults. You can't reasonably expect a 3-year-old to defend themselves or defend their property, whatever it might be. So I'm curious as to what the anarcho-capitalist stance on groups within society who are incapable of self-defense is.
Well, there's of course always going to be groups of people that can't defend themselves, and it's definitely up to, I mean, as you gave an example of a 3-year-old possibly having to protect themselves. We don't really see many 3-year-olds that live alone independently. They have parents, and it's the parents' obligation to do that. Same thing. I mean, with the elderly. I mean, there's either people that can take care of them, or or they can defend themselves. I mean, I'm definitely pro-gun. I mean, old people know how to use weapons too. And I mean, even, some people on, I guess that would be considered disabled can too, depending on the the degree, but usually once there's a degree where they can't take care of themselves, there's someone that can take care of them for them. I don't think it's necessary for the state to force people to take care of them. I think there will be people that will voluntarily be able to do that. And
if I could say
Go for it.
something on that, I think my point on, and I was afraid sort of people might misconstrue my point on this is, I'm not saying that I think that the government has the responsibility to take care of these people. What I mean more is in terms of how are their basic sort of rights ensured, because certainly, obviously I think children primarily need to be are in the responsibility and care of their parents, but I'm thinking is in what way, how are you supposed to enforce, or how are you supposed to make sure that there's a precedent established that parents do not abuse their children, or that people who do abuse and exploit children are punished, if not through some standard system of punishment for these actions, which is law, and it would necessitate the use of force.
Well, I think I'm not completely against the use of force. As I said before, I'm against a system that I'm against an institution that systemizes the initiation of force. So, I mean, if I'm for laws. Laws are fine. Laws are perfect. It's important to have laws and to have people understand the laws. And as far as abuse, things like that go, that is the initiation of force on the side of the parents, the guardians, and similarly to a society now, I guess, you would have not a central authority that's funded by taxation, but there's definitely a market to protect people, and people would pay into that and be able to have that defense. Not only okay, go for it.
Yeah, when people talk about private defense, because that's the thing is, if you're going to have laws, you need a mechanism of enforcing them, and that's essentially the role of the police. If you're going to have the police, they need to get funded somehow, and I think that most people, I think the vast majority of individuals would say they agree and they're perfectly fine with paying taxes to fund the police, to fund their own protection. And I would say that when it comes to private security, I have a security license. I've worked in security. We're not a substitute for the police. That's generally not how private security works at all.
Well, if I could just jump.
Sure.
If I could just jump in on that, because I don't think that I'm not an anarcho-capitalist, first of all, so I'm not saying that I think that there shouldn't be any kind of police. But any services that a private protection agency like security guards and etc. would provide now, you wouldn't expect those to be a replacement for the police, because that's not what the business model is. That business is set up in a world that has police. So you shouldn't expect those to be the same as they would be in a hypothetical anarcho-capitalist society.
Well, for instance, like Fritz in South Africa, where the police has largely failed, there are private police firms.
Yes. Go ahead.
But that's because the state fails to provide that service, the market has stepped in to provide that service. But one of the things about Libertyverse and your concern with children is that it's the libertarian track record on that is not good. Well, Murray Rothbard argued that you could practice child abuse by not feeding it, exposing it, or not giving it clothes or shelter. And then Walter Block upped the ante and said that, well, if you don't want your children and nobody else does, you can kill them. We're not talking about fetuses. We're talking about children, like toddlers. And I'm like, what the heck? I mean, it's not a good track record. It's something that leaves one room for pause.
Yeah, I haven't.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make this into pick on the ANCAP here, but I just did want to quickly say, Bones the Rabbit is someone in the chat at the moment, and he's brought up kind of a good point. You were saying before, Libertyverse, that you'd want the parents to stop someone from mistreating their children. What if the parents are the ones mistreating them?
Yeah, I think there can be organizations that can do that. First of all, I mean, now if parents are abusing their children, someone has to first find out, right? So whether it be a neighbor, a teacher, someone like that, they would find out the same way, and still they can report that to, you know, the agency, you know.
So you would essentially rely on the kindness of strangers.
Well, I don't think that's mainly the point. It's, you know, currently right now, since when we have a system of police, it's not that, you know, you still need somebody to actually go out and report it, either the child or if, you know, the neighbors hear or see something happening, obviously they still have to report it to the police. But again, I think, you know, my main criticism is I think I would take the pragmatic approach to that. I still think that having a publicly funded police force is the most efficient or most practical and most sort of humane way of ensuring that the law is upheld.
Well, Fritz, this kind of gets at the point of how do you fund it, right? I mean, this isn't exactly the same thing, but in the 19th century, when firefighting was privately funded, people would have a medallion from the firefighting company that they were paying into. And it would happen where firefighters wouldn't put out fires of other houses because they didn't have their protection. And that would lead to a lot of fire hazard. By the time it spread to houses they actually were securing, the damage could get out of control. And so we have the problem of, well, they're just not going to cover people that don't pay into it. But we all suffer if crime and fire prevention isn't enforced adequately.
And I think, yeah, and moving that to the police that sort of moves into my concern about you know, what if you're a homeless person? What if you're somebody who's destitutely poor that can't afford to pay for private security?
I think that's probably one of the least of their problems at that point.
No.
Honestly,
I could easily envision. I could easily envision a gang or something, a gang, or like these people probably also live in very bad neighborhoods as well. And you can easily envision the fact that they'd have to deal with gang violence on a regular basis, that they would just generally not feel safe. And I mean, I would love to see the idea of that. And I just don't see how if you privatize the police force, and you can assume that these people wouldn't be able to afford to pay for a private security force, how they would react to the fact that they've essentially lost any sort of legal protection. They've lost the idea that they can at least call somebody that will come in and stop somebody trying to kill or rob them.
Yeah.
I mean, there's different economic models where, you know, you don't need to pay someone right away for their services. I mean, you go to a homeless man goes to a hospital, he'll still get treated in the ER. You know, that's still possible.
That's because he's legally to be fair, Libertyverse, that's because the hospital's legally required to treat him.
Yeah, true. But I mean, in a sense, I mean, doctors, you know, as well have the Hippocratic Oath, which isn't, you know, I mean, people do help.
Yeah.
But to quickly go back to what sorry, Todd, right? Todd was saying about the track record, I guess, of libertarianism or anarcho-capitalism. I did take a look at your intellectual bankruptcy of self-ownership. That was yours, right?
Yeah, that was mine. Yep.
Yeah. I did take a look at it, and it was interesting. But as far as Rothbard and Block go, I wouldn't agree with their application of the non-aggression principle when it comes to children, I guess. I haven't necessarily completely read what they said aside from what you wrote in your article, but basically I wouldn't agree that you can neglect your child. I think it would be. I believe there's an implicit contract with children when you have them, and the same thing goes for when you mentioned abortion. I guess I would consider myself pro-life. I do think that children have self-ownership.
Okay. Well, if you, okay, so I can see that, like under an anarcho-capitalist system of morality, I don't think anyone would say that that system would allow morally the abuse of children, for example. But my thing is, how practically can it avoid it? And that is to say, I do think that there are some services that would come about in a free market. There would be like private defense forces and arbitration for services, things like that. And I do think that some amount of these sorts of things, child abuse, for example, would probably be stopped. However, I am also of the opinion that it would be significantly less than is currently stopped by a central government. Now, I agree with you, Libertyverse, that the central government is kind of unethical in some ways, but is it? I would sort of weigh that up against a whole lot of children being abused and say, well, is instituting the central government, is that outweighed by the positives of preventing these children from being abused?
And I think like an example of this is if you looked at Rotherham, this is a clear example. Certainly, the reason you can make the reasons as to why, but the fact remains that in Rotherham, the police did not enforce the law, and as a result, 1,400 young girls got raped. And the fact is, I think if they were enforcing, and you sort of see this a lot in European countries where countries like the UK probably wouldn't have nearly as bad as the problem with Islamists if the police actually just applied the law universally. If they just went into these Sharia courts and just said, no, you can't do this. This is not, you can't have a parallel legal system. You can't do this. Or if they went to like the Muslims going, this is a Muslim area, no drinking, no homosexuality. They go, no, you can't tell people what to do. And I think so because go ahead.
If they applied the law consistently, then I do think it would significantly help. Additionally, a lot of those mosques they can actually prove have like criminal connections. Like they do have connections to terrorists, and etc. If that was like some organization that was affiliated with the mafia, the police would have no problem going in and shutting it down. But because it's a mosque that has an affiliation with jihadis, they won't. So there is definitely a double standard that I think if you got rid of, you probably would get rid of a lot of, if not most of, the problems that UK experiences there.
I think the real question here is Libertyverse seems to think that people are still going to be altruistic in a libertarian society. But I really doubt that, because in defending the undefendable, Walter Block attacks charity as on the grounds of social Darwinism, that charity is dysgenic. And we have a long tradition with people like Ayn Rand and Rothbard that altruism is bad. And furthermore, that we have no positive obligations to our fellow man. I mean, Walter Block in one of his lectures gives the example of a man drowning. He says, if I don't save him, I haven't done anything wrong. It's like, if I save him, I've done something super erogatory, but I have no obligation to save him. Well, I mean, all things being equal, you do have an obligation to try to save that person. And I just don't believe that attitude would survive in a libertarian society.
And I think, I'm sorry.
I think I agree with that, actually.
And
I don't think you have an obligation to save him.
Before I can say it, before we can get to this, and if I could just sort of say my piece on this is, when we talk about the idea of that people will still be altruistic, I'm not, and this was the main criticism that guy T made in his comments on my video is that he thought that I was insinuating that if we got rid of the government, everyone would just start abusing children. My point is, I think the vast majority of people wouldn't abuse their children and wouldn't harm their fellow man. But the problem is that the entire reason why we have a system of law in the first place is that, yes, well, we should have an ethical and moral standard for our society. You do need a system of you do need a system to deal with the people who won't follow that system of morality.
Well, that's fine. I don't have a problem with having a system of law, as I said, but
Who pays for it?
I just don't think it needs to be funded by taxation. There are other economic models that can do that.
But in the end, everybody needs to be protected. Everyone sort of needs protection, needs some sort of protection, and so everyone would still be.
I mean, people don't need protection at all times. You can have protection when you need it. People can protect themselves. There's different ways to do that.
Okay. Well, let's talk about, because I've also worked in elder care, working in nursing homes, and and they've had to establish a whole separate system of law for elder abuse, because that is unfortunately a fairly common problem. In that, old people, and I'm not talking about old person that can live by themselves and still defend themselves, use a gun or what. I'm talking about very nursing, as in they need consistent help to go about their day. And the problem is that you need a system, is that there's not this doesn't really seem to that if somebody's a senile, and this goes both for the fact that with children and with people in nursing homes, is that they can't really, it's not very practical for them, like, oh, I want some protection because my nurse is, stealing from me. Let me go call the private security, and they'll do that. These are people who probably can't even use the phone.
Mm-hmm. So
how are they supposed to get that help?
First of all, how do they get that help now? How do they communicate to someone that that's happening now?
Well, and that's
they
the
do
problem.
it through like a guardian or something, right?
Yes.
Someone that has put them there. I mean, it's
well,
we're just talking. I think the main thing is you're talking about the funding. The difference in funding, but the actual system can be very similar as far as the process it goes to get and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, I suppose the bigger the problem is still with payment. Then, I mean, I have no doubt that you could get a system of private security that would be able to protect people, but the problem is that they're only going to follow the rules so long as they have the financial incentive to do so. And again, this means that people who are poor, people who can't actually afford, are like children, can't afford this sort of protection. And
their parents can.
Yes, but again, what if their parents are abusing them?
Well, sure, but I mean, in an anarcho sort of capitalist society, I don't think that it's going to be as simple as the individual has to pay for the protection, or they're not going to get it. Because I would personally, if I was in such a society, I would want to, I'd live somewhere and pay a private protection agency that is commonly paid in that area, which is going to enforce something like the current system of law that we have, because I wouldn't want to live somewhere with a whole bunch of abused kids. So, I mean, I would pay into that personally.
Well, all right, then how do you prevent the private security from abusing people? Because
okay, hold on.
Well, if that's not very profitable.
Yeah, that's one thing, but I think you might be holding, I guess, this anarcho-capitalist society to maybe a different standard than what we're living in right now. I'm not gonna say that there is that this is gonna be a utopia or anything. This is all about the system of law, and as it stands, the system of law.
Who's going to make the law?
Who?
Yeah, if you want a system, if you say you still want a system of law, who should make the law?
I think the law should be basically natural rights, basically natural law, and basically it's going to have to be a majority of people that accept that accept this. I'm not saying that, oh, we're gonna have a revolution, we're gonna have an ANCAP utopia tomorrow. You know, this is something that takes time, and people need to basically learn the principles of.
All right. Well, what if I? Well, why is it a morally okay thing? What if I disagree with it? What if I think that use of force is sometimes justified for certain things?
And you're in an ANCAP society already?
Yeah. That and like what do you? Because this is the primary, I think, sort of fickle thing about ideologies, or if you want to sort of change society, is what do you do with the people who disagreed with you?
I quickly want to just point out that we've kind of got two debates going here. There's like a moral one and a pragmatic one. Would an anarcho-capitalist society in fact function to serve the moral purposes that we've outlined?
That's a good
and
point.
Also, is this actually moral, right? So I just want to quickly check. I would say that if in fact it was possible to have sort of the same kind of level of services that I think are morally necessary to have, police forces that'll stop child abuse was one example we had. If it was possible to have those in an ANCAP society, would said ANCAP society be more ethical to have than a state-based society which has roughly the same outcome?
Yeah, that's
Just as a
kind of
hypothetical.
that's kind of what I was saying. I mean, we're talking about the proper role of government. I guess that's what this discussion is based on, and that's kind of a should, right? That is what should the proper role of government can be.
Yeah,
I'm not saying that there's like, oh, that I can tell you the percent chance that there will be some ANCAP society. I don't even know. I don't know if it's even possible.
I can almost assert it's not.
Well,
Yeah,
I don't like
can I-
making predictions. But
can I just check the hypothetical though? Like, actually,
Sure.
I want to see if we can get an answer from everyone from this. Actually, if an ANCAP society would provide roughly the same level of protection, but just do it without government involvement, would that be better, or is that actually?
I think that's the fundamental. That's sort of the problem. Is that like if we're discussing a sort of system or a system of society or structure that's going to be applied society wide, you have to debate whether one of the I'm perfectly fine with having two debates here. I think maybe you have to make sure that it's actually something that could be something viable, because you don't
absolutely
because the thing the thing that I'm afraid of the most is that this is going to end up just like Marxism, where it's in theory it can all work out perfectly fine and no abuse, nothing bad's going to happen. But as soon as some sort of revolution occurs, or if this society ever if people with this ideology ever get to implement it, is it all going to go to shit?
Disagree with I'm not on the same page with you with Marxism. I don't think that even in theory it's moral. But so that's kind of a
no. I'm talking about in general. I'm talking about how an ideology that can try and assert that it can work perfectly fine and be pragmatic. And I'm not talking about what people personally think about the ideologies. I'm just thinking that one of my fear about anarcho-capitalism is that much like how Marxism was viewed, is that because it's a new system because it's something that hasn't ever actually been tried. Is it actually something that's is the reason why it hasn't been tried perhaps something done for good reason?
Here's the thing. It's not that it's not that the society hasn't been tried. This is a spectrum of how large you want your government to be. ANCAP is just at the lowest form, at voluntary interactions. We have voluntary interactions every day in pretty much most of our daily life. We have voluntary interactions, and that's how we go about that. That's how society goes about, their course.
Well, actually,
Fritz, can I say something, Fritz?
Sure.
Yeah, one of the things that came up in relation to private security, and it comes up a lot in these kinds of debates, is whether it's police force or the military. The people that are skeptical of it are going to say, well, won't they just attack the people that are paying them? And then the libertarians will say, well, no, they're not going to do that because, X, Y, and Z other groups are going to fight them. But you see, the idea of private armies. We have that. That's how the Roman Republic fell with Marius, Sulla, Caesar, and Pompey. They all had armies loyal to themselves, privately funded, and not loyal to the state or to the people. And in the Middle Ages, with the use of mercenaries, another alternative that the libertarians have advocated.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
And,
you were
I
breaking up.
can hear you.
when they don't get paid, they go on a rampage. The black bands were in the 100 Years' War looting and pillaging people. And in fact, the Byzantine Empire in the 14th century hired some Spanish mercenaries. And when they didn't get paid, they revolted and created their own kingdom in Athens. So
Okay, so
there's plenty of incentives and historical reasons why private actors leading armies would attack the people that are paying them.
so let me ask you, Todd, were these private armies? Would you say they were an institution that was systemizing the initiation of force?
Well, yeah, but that's the risk we're talking about. We're saying, would they?
Well,
would they
that's
be
the,
able to do that?
so I mean, to break it down, you're saying we need a central government, so we don't have smaller governments. You're saying let's not abolish this state because of another state.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
excellent.
primarily,
Well,
my
I agree with
That's
that.
not what I'm saying. What I'm saying
Well-
is this: is that what the people that are fighting, where does their loyalty lie? Is it purely mercenary to money and an individual that's paying for them, or is it for the common good as a whole? I mean, I don't like standing armies, which is why I prefer militias like the Swiss, because in that case, we avoid both the danger of a standing army, whether state or private, and the predatory nature of private military. I mean, private militaries are just as predatory, if not more so, than state militaries. In Europe, when private militaries run riot, like mercenaries in the Roman under Caesar and Pompey, things pretty much just shut down. I mean, society was in lockdown while they were rampaging, whereas the legions, when they were doing their job, were protect. They had a Pax Romana under Augustus. So contrast that with the Republic.
This is actually kind of my biggest problem with anarcho-capitalism, which is essentially what you were saying before, Libertyverse, that you want to have one big government so you don't have a bunch of smaller governments. Well, yeah, kind of, right? If you reckon the government as just an entity which systemizes force, and then you could say that all these private armies, the worry is that they are in danger of also doing that. And that would essentially be where I'm coming from. If you remove the centralized force that kind of has a monopoly to some extent on force in an area, then you're sort of opening the door for a whole lot of other groups to start using said force. And those groups, the fundamental difference is those groups are not democratically accountable. Like
Exactly,
the private military isn't. And
Exactly.
I agree that democracy isn't perfect, but it's better than no control over them at all.
Sure, the private military is in a way democratically.
If I could say something right before then, is that's again, as I put in my video, is Todd and Danny got this exactly right on the nose. Is what I think is that I think that if you were to manage to abolish the central government, is that I essentially believe that what would happen very soon afterwards would be the CEOs or some renegade generals would move in and become new governments. And if you think that having the U.S. government, the government we currently have, is tyranny, then it would be hell on earth under these new governments, because they would essentially be warlords. Because they would be able to have it would either be generals with their own armies or leaders of corporations hiring private armies.
Yes. So what I was gonna say is, I mean, it seems like there's you guys are forgetting that there can still be accountability with these private armies, and I mean, you guys even brought up that the main factor of accountability with them, which is your concern is how are they going to be paid. When they are destroying whole places, how are these people going to get paid?
Well, there's a very easy solution to this, which is what they've done throughout history, which is they'll just loot and pillage.
Yeah, so yeah, you're just
And
talking
tax
about a state. We're now we're at the point where we're talking
No,
about.
I'm saying private
No, I
military.
agree.
I'm saying
Well,
private.
well,
I think Libertyverse has a really good point there, which is on
Here's the
one
point.
level, which is that is similar to what the state is doing, right? The state does have this kind of control over the population using force, which is the thing you're worried about with these conquering warlords.
I mean, at this point, you're kind of interested more in how are we going to transition to this. I think that's the concern. That's
No. I generally still think that having private security, private armies, or private defense forces is simply the fact that if they want money, they'll get it. If their primary concern is to make money, and there is no higher authorities outside of your own ability to pay them, well, here's the thing: is if they, because what I'm thinking is you could essentially have, let's say, you're paying this private military, you're paying this private security force to protect you and your property. What happens if they just come in and just start stealing all of your property? I mean, you don't have the ability to stop them, because even if you have like an AR-15, they'll have like 5 guys with assault rifles. You're not going to be able to.
So let me get it straight. So you call them to come over or something, you said?
Well, either that or just the simple fact that because if we're going to talk about how this works, as in you sort of have, let's just say for ease of discussion that private securities sort of work the same way they public. The way it officially works is the same way as the police do. Is that they have like offices, they have like a headquarters and places like that, and they have patrol cars, and they still operate like the police. But the practice, they're not accountable to any government. They're not accountable to constitution or any sort of established laws. Then what is exactly to prevent them? Because if they can make, I generally think they can make more money just by raiding and pillage. They can make more immediate money just by raiding and pillaging people's houses.
Well, even private organizations have accountability for their staff.
To who?
What do you mean? To the people that own the company?
Why? The people that own the.
Of course. Of course, you'd have accountability to the shareholders.
Yeah, I mean, if the primary goal of the organization, if the system is to say protect, and that's what the shareholders want, that's how they know they're going to be making money, and they find out that that their employees are not following that system because for whatever reason they want to loot or whatever, there's going to be accountability to that when they find out.
Who are the shareholders accountable to?
This gets back to Fritz's point. The shareholders are not going to be the vulnerable people that Fritz is worried about being abused here. They're not going to have the money or the wherewithal to do it, either because they're too young or too old or too poor. And so they won't have any meaningful pressure to put on these institutions.
Who won't have meaningful pressure? Are you saying that the institution itself has systemized this behavior to be?
No, I'm saying that you said earlier that if these private defense agencies start attacking people, then they're going to be accountable to a body of people, and so they're not going to attack the people they're accountable to. Well, on the one hand, the people, even if the people of the lower classes that Fritz is worried about did have shares in the company, they would not have a controlling share. They're too poor. The controlling share would be people of a much higher wealth class status. And so those people that, if they decide to go rogue and attack the poor people, they won't have enough representation in the company to make any meaningful protest.
And I'm even talking about I'm talking about people who are so destitute they could not afford a share. Like that would be a pipe dream of theirs to be able to afford a share in a company's. Like I'm saying, like if you're struggling just to feed your family, you can't afford. How on earth? How is your rights supposed to protect? How are your rights supposed to be protected if you can't afford private protection? Private protection. And and hear me out. If you're going to say that if it sort of works for a hospital where like if you desperately need treatment, hospital can't refuse you, even though you did say yourself that they are that's because they're legally obligated to. But what happens? So like, let's say you're really poor, somebody's trying to break into your house, or you know, you need private you need security services or whatever. You call them. You somehow get it so that they're obligated to protect you. They do it, and then you know they want to work out a payment plan in order for you to be able to, you know, them to be compensated. What if you can't afford that? Then they'll essentially punish you. So now you're essentially just getting punished. So that now that you're going to be punished by the people who just protected you, and that's a much. And I think that's a much worse system. It's a much worse. And I think it's a much better idea to have it so that poor people don't ever have to worry about that. That they can understand that that they're going to be protected, and they're not going to have to worry about having to pay the people that protect them.
I mean, you can say the same thing for healthcare. Let's socialize healthcare, and let's make sure everyone gets their health.
We can have the debate. I certainly believe there's a debate. I think there's a reasonable debate to be had over healthcare, but I think what I'm talking about is immediate services. So something like the police or the fire department.
Well, real quick, I'd say the
police or the
I
hospital.
don't
Right?
want to let that one just slide, because how on earth is the police more immediate than like
Then
the ambulance?
yourself, or well,
Right?
I
Like
mean,
you're talking
what
about
about
health
yourself?
services, and yeah, then yourself. But I mean, Fritz was saying that your example about health services wasn't valid because it's not immediate enough, and it seems just as immediate as the police.
Well, I'm talking about
Yeah.
like a long-term healthcare, like visits to the doctors or getting prescription drugs. I'm not talking about you got in a car crash, now you need to go to the hospital.
Yeah, I mean,
I absolutely believe that, you know, people should have the people. I think that as a society, I think that is something that people should be that should be an option for everybody. That they shouldn't have to worry about that if they need to, if there's an emergency, they can go to a hospital and they don't have to worry about paying for it.
Wait, okay, you think that would be nice, but I mean, are you willing to enact force in order to do it?
Yes,
Because you're going. Okay, so you
because I think
because at that point you're not enacting force in order to save someone's life. You're enacting force in order to save someone's money, and like, if it's that doesn't seem justified to me. You're taking
how am I
some
saving?
people's money.
If I'm talking about immediate, or which what service are we?
So when the ambulance comes and picks you up from the car crash, and then you go to the hospital. In both a system in which in both the current American system, at least, you're going to be treated. The difference between having sort of like socialized healthcare and not is whether or not you'll be in debt afterwards. So at that point, you're not forcibly taking people's money via the use of government in order to save someone's life, which I would argue would be justified. You're now forcibly taking someone's money via the use of government to save someone money.
I think. Well, yeah. Again, I really don't actually know myself where I fall on the healthcare debate, because I think that.
are you guys still?
Yeah, I can still hear you. I'm just thinking. I'm talking. I think we're talking a little more about, again, immediate services such as the police, fire department, and getting immediate medical care. And I think that
Right, but again, the immediate medical care that doesn't need to be subsidized by the government, does it?
And the thing is that you were posing it as if these people that are paying, that will have to pay for a service. You know, I mean, you know, if something happens where someone's stealing from them, or someone, you know, breaks into their home, or even if they get into a car crash, as if those people shouldn't have to pay for a valuable service as far as saving their life, or something like that. You know, even if it's down the road. And as far as when you talked about punishment, it doesn't necessarily need to be anything physical. I mean, right now we have credit scores, and if you don't pay your debts, you have a bad reputation with other lenders, you know?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The problem is, so if what you're saying is that, let's say, because I think the way you'd want this to work, right, with a private police, because now I'm just thinking of a sketch from a bit of Fry and Laurie, but there's let's say somebody robs your house, right? So let's say somebody robs your house, you know who did it, and they run off. You call the private police, and they'll chase him, and they'll track him down. So who determines what punishment should be administered, and who determines, and how do you, how do you determine punishment for a criminal?
Honestly,
do you think private courts are a good idea?
I have ideas about how these things could work, but all in all, I can't. I'm not a mind reader. I can't determine how a free market system, what kind of economic models and what kind of businesses and ways to deal with society would come about. If you look at today and think back 40 years and ask, how such and such will be done, you would probably, have a hard time pinpointing out exactly how that's going to happen. So I can't really, you're kind of asking me to speculate on this anarcho-capitalist society. I think we've skipped over the actual principle first of,
yes, because I think that's I think this is generally my problem in I've seen streams with somebody like Sargon of Akkad debating anarcho-capitalists, and I think one of the biggest problems is that you get sort of bogged down in the minutiae of things, because I would much prefer to sort of debate these central premises. And I think that, but if I could make one point on the idea of the free market determining things, I genuinely think that, and this is one of the principal reasons as to why I'm not an anarcho-capitalist, I think that there are certain things which should be separate.
Sorry. Can you repeat that? You went out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Everything I said, or just
from the last.
Cut out for me. I think it might be your end, Libertyverse.
Oh, my end. Maybe like 10, 15 seconds.
Okay, so to reiterate my point is, I think before we move to arguing central principles, I would say that one of my primary concerns about anarcho-capitalism is that I think that there are certain things which should not be part of the free market. And from a moral standpoint and from understanding sort of the effects they've had on society, and some of these things are something like self-defense, like immediate care, like sex, and like drugs, or like generally vices. And that I think that the sexual revolution is a clear case of sex entering the marketplace, and it's had a absolutely disastrous effect on society, because beforehand, how
is it sex entering the marketplace? I'm not sure I can follow that.
By the way, by means of giving wide access to birth control, the start of the abortion industry, and having pornography industry, and
you think the pornography industry is bad?
Yes, absolutely.
On what grounds?
Do you want me to bring up numerous studies about the effects of pornography on people?
Well, hold on. I think this is a good chance to get into principle, because I think this is where the principles might differ. As you mentioned,
chime in at any time, please do.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, the sexual revolution, as far as access to birth control and all that, you need to keep in mind that the effects, the effects that you seem to be concerned about won't necessarily be effects if there was a free market.
Well, I'm not actually even talking. I'm not even necessarily talking about just pornography or just birth control. No, I'm talking about the fact that before the sexual revolution, generally the consensus, at least in Western societies, on sexuality and marriage is that men in general want sex, and in essentially the way social and gender roles have worked for thousands of years is that, all right, if you want sex, you have to be married. You have to have a wife, and you generally have to stay faithful to her. And essentially, this establishes a system in which you get sex in exchange for becoming the head of a family unit. And this has worked brilliantly well for society. It's created very stable. It's what helps create stable societies and sustainable birth rates. Now, enter the sexual revolution, in that men want to still have lots of sex, so in order to capitalize on that, to create a sexual marketplace for individuals wanting partners, you basically say, hey, it's now perfectly fine to have sex with whoever you want and have as many partners as you want. And so various alternatives, various solutions, quote unquote, not to, actually somewhat to be Nazi-esque with the idea of abortion, is to the natural consequences of sex. So as in, now people can make tons of money off of abortion and tons of money off of the birth control pill. Because, again, abortions are quite expensive and people make a lot of money off of it. And so I think...
Okay, I just want to quickly... I think that this does come down to principle at this point, and I want to use this to sort of segue into individualism versus collectivism, because ultimately what you're saying there is that despite the fact that people would prefer to do X or Y, it's not good for society as a whole, and therefore it's bad. That would be fundamentally...
It's also bad for the individual. It's ultimately also bad for individuals.
I don't know. It's not. I mean, you can show a study... First of all, I have seen a lot of the studies that say that porn is linked with negative results. I contest quite a lot of that, but even if you were able to show that there were very negative results for an individual for looking at porn, for example, just to take one item there, that doesn't really matter too much to me, because there are some things that I want to do, right, as an individual, that are going to be harmful to me in some way. I like drinking alcohol. And that's you can pull out 1 million studies with that showing that it's bad for me, but that's kind of irrelevant because I value the positives more than the negatives. And I do not want the collective to tell me that my system of valuing things for myself is wrong and I must conform.
Well, before we get into principle, if I could make a point on directly addressing that, is the fact that when I talk about the sexual revolution, I think that the change in social mores regarding sexuality and marriage and things like that, that's directly what's helped lead to the increased rates of absentee fathers, single mothers, and what people refer to as the breakdown of the family. And I don't think, and I think that's, yes. And I think that is something that should be opposed. And I think, certainly, I think before people call me some evil religious right, I don't want to enforce laws on this right now. I think that that's not feasible or practical. What I want to do would be to engage this culturally and argue that something like monogamy, like marriage, like traditional family structures are better for people, that people will ultimately be happier. I don't want to force people to do this. I don't think that's necessary. I don't want to do that.
So I will agree with some that the sort of the sexual revolution, some aspects of it did lead to like absentee fathers or single mothers, depending on which way you want to lay the blame. But a lot of the aspects you referred to absolutely did not. I can guarantee you that abortion has reduced single motherhood from where it would otherwise be.
Well, actually,
porn also doesn't contribute to single motherhood.
Mm-hmm. Well,
however,
thing about
I would agree that the idea of no sex before marriage, now you're starting to get into something that could contribute to single motherhood if we get rid of it.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so the aspects I agree with you on, but
that also
things you mentioned, no.
And things like hookup culture and just getting rid of the sort of emphasis on marriage as an end goal of dating rather than just sex. And with abortion is, again, since I do believe it is taking the life of another person, I saw your video. I thought you made some good points on it, Danny. But, if I ultimately believe that abortion is taking human life, and it was largely, that was because if you actually look at the numbers...
Well, I agree that if it does, then it should be illegal, but it doesn't, is the point.
Well, I mean, people do believe it is, but anyways, the fact is the demand for abortion was actually relatively quite small before the 1950s and 60s. It didn't, there's a reason as to why people didn't demand legalization of abortion before the 1970s, because there wasn't a very high demand for abortions
Right.
in general.
I mean, I'm not convinced that abortion's a bad thing. I mean, I think you can make an ethical argument that it is like late into the process when you've got actually got like a brain and all that sort of thing. But
And
before that point, before the time when you could reasonably consider that there's something of ethical value there, it's not a bad. In fact, it seems a hugely positive thing for society. I imagine that the problem with single motherhood would be massively worse if we couldn't get abortions.
yeah, but
So
you wouldn't actually have to worry about it at all if you had
Fritz, hold on a second.
Go ahead, Todd. Actually,
One of the points here is if you value individual freedom, then you should be opposed to the sexual revolution, because it's given that nature abhors a vacuum, who takes the place of the father? It's the state. I mean, don't know how many times I've heard libertarians complain about feminists just going to the daddy state. But
then
that's the thing.
but then you just remove those laws, right? Like, you don't solve that problem by reducing individual freedom and saying, all right, well, we're going to we're going to try to at least create some social taboos. And Fritz, you did imply that later on you might, if worse comes to worse, support some laws on this. You just get rid of those legal structures, right?
No, but you still have the externality.
Why have we got a system to begin with where you can have a woman who purposely pokes some holes in a condom and fucks a dude, gets pregnant, and he's now liable. Like, that is not a good system. Those are not good laws. Get rid of those, and I think more freedom, not less.
The problem is the externalities that still occur with or without the laws. You're still going to have single mothers, and you're still going to have children that are raised in a. I mean, look at the inner cities. I mean, single motherhood.
Have some. I mean, okay, if you get rid of the ability of someone, if you get rid of the ability of a woman to get pregnant and then leech off the state, I think less people will do it. It's basic economics. If you fund something,
that you should deny. So I actually have thought about that. Is deny welfare. Well, I don't really like with the welfare state anyways, but deny welfare to single mothers as a way to massively disincentivize them from being single mothers. So I actually might agree with you on that. Is getting rid of the welfare. But actually, what I think is what's a bit sad right now is the fact that if you actually wanted to start a race war in America, if you legitimately wanted this, the actually best way to do it would be to say no more welfare, because the inner cities would absolutely explode if that were the case. And I think that's one of the sad parts of having a society that has morally degraded, in my view, that get with the breakdown of the family is the increased reliance on the state, and that's essentially why the African American community overwhelmingly votes Democrat, because if the Democrats are the ones who keep saying, the Democrats have had a horrible effect on the African American community, like the conservative African American writer Thomas Sowell pointed out, where we can debate whether or not the effect of 200 years of slavery, but we sort of know the fact that the effect of 30-40 years of progressives or of Democrats in charge of black cities has been far worse. And
well, real quick, Fritz, the point is that there's a correlation between the breakdown of family structure and the rise of state power.
Exactly.
Because what happens is society stops working effectively. Now, how that antisocial activities manifested, maybe you're right, Danny, that women they'd be manifesting it differently, but you'd still have the social breakdown of children not raised by two parents. And the breakdown is.
I think there would be fewer single mothers.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, here's kind of this whole line of conversation is kind of my problem with the whole ends justify the means. Society with its, let's look at the sexual revolution like you guys were looking at. I don't think you can nail down this certain thing was the defining factor that caused what we have today. Society and the world is too complex to say, this is the thing that caused this So we shouldn't have this anymore.
Well, I think you can. I think very, very easily you can point to the availability of reliable birth control in terms of the pill in the 1950s and 60s as one of the primary causes of the. Without the pill, I would be very doubtful if the sexual revolution had ever happened at all.
I agree that the sexual revolution might not have happened, but okay. Well, really quickly, because we've already moved on from the topic, and I need to mention something that I didn't point out before. I'm not on record saying we should deny welfare to single mothers. My position was that child support shouldn't be a thing. There shouldn't be like laws around child support at all.
Well, and again, that was a result of the sort of. And again, divorce culture, very high rates of divorce. That's something that is another result of the sexual revolution. And that was that's the sole idea of child support is largely also came from that as well.
So where I'm going is, there's so many factors that go into, I
don't actually think there's very many factors. I think there's a few that can generally be placed as to why the sexual revolution happened in the first place, and one of them was the counter. I think the two main pillars were the counterculture movement of the '60s and the birth control pill. And
here's the thing, I mean, I think those are definitely probably main factors, but I think what's going on here is this as Danny was talking about, individualist versus collectivist. This is very collectivist, and I know you're not trying to say let's suddenly create laws outlining this stuff, but what it does is when you look at an individual basis, these people, I guess, involved in the sexual revolution, or people that are taking birth control, stuff like that, it effectively turns your system or the way of thinking into it takes away this presumption of innocence, I guess, where we're now saying, since this happened, so collectively this thing is bad for everyone, and that's not necessarily the case.
I think it generally is bad for. I think. No, I think. Well, you can look at study after study showing that kids raised in a single mother household are much worse off than raised in a two-parent household.
Well, I don't think anyone disagrees with that.
Yeah,
so I'm saying is, I think this is something that you can almost universally apply it.
No. But what I'm saying is, say someone wants birth control. Okay, that's maybe on a collective level, that sort of thing ended up being having negative effect.
No, I think birth control had a positive effect. So again, I think that,
sorry, go ahead.
Libertyverse, you were saying before that you think that the sexual revolution, etc., is far too complicated. There's too many factors. I'm going to have to disagree with that. I think that it's really quite simple. The negative aspects, like how did we get all this single motherhood, is really the thing here. Well, it's very simple, because women are currently, under our current laws, incentivized to do it. It's.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah,
I don't understand why it's sort of overcomplicated talking about societal incentives.
If I could clarify
the culture,
something,
when it's simple in the laws, it's currently it's subsidized. That you if you're a woman, you do have the option of getting yourself pregnant and then leeching off the state. That is a thing you can do. It shouldn't.
Yes.
I think we're getting off topic here, because I think even though I'm a bit confused as how we got to this from libertarianism. I think it's ultimately the idea that if we're going to be discussing, can we move to principles now that you want to talk about Libertyverse? And I think what I would say about the sexual revolution is that I think that is an instance in which, I don't think that everything. I think my main point is I don't think that everything should be left to the free market. I think there are certain things in which, either through social mores or through law, should be restricted, and that's and one of these things happens to be marriage. Is that even if being a Christian, I have certain views on marriage, but I do believe that polygamy at least should be illegal, and I think that. No.
Why?
Well, hold on a second, Fritz. I think the point that we've been not dealing with on Libertyverse's position is he defined in the beginning the state is an institution that initiates force. And really, the question is, when is force legitimate and how should it be used?
Not necessarily initiates force, but it systemizes the initiation of force.
Yeah, it's a systematic application of it. Right?
Yeah. If it's
like
just,
systematic racism, or
no. I mean, say there's a guy that steals. That's not the state. If he goes to a house and he steals something because he's hungry, he's not the state because he hasn't necessarily systemized that as he's not an institution and he's not systemizing it.
So how do you think the first states came about? In general, why do you think states exist in the first place?
Because sometimes people would rather use aggression than voluntary interaction to get what they want.
Well, no. Let's talk about early days of agriculture, something like that, where like a tribe of people decide to form a common community, and and essentially they agree that this is the state. We all agree that this is going to be the set of rules we live under. Is that a state? If they voluntarily created a state, is that a possible thing?
Are they all in agreement?
Yeah, let's say it's like a small tribe of like 20, 30 people. They all say, yes, we want to be part of this. Or like the people that didn't want, they were just kicked out and they're on their own now. And these people wanted to create a community, and they said, these are the laws we're going to live by, and we're going to enforce them by some means.
Then what's your question exactly?
I'm saying is that, would you define that as a state? Can you create? So I'm trying to provide an example of you could create a state that was made voluntarily.
Well, I would consider that a state if, say, I mean, it depends in a way, but I would say by the example you gave, if say someone builds a house in that area, and that is their property, if people want them out for some reason, unless this was contractually agreed upon that they would follow such and such rules.
So let me. So you used contractually obligated. You think all interactions should be some sort of contractual obligation, that that's sort of the be all end all of our interactions with one another?
Not be all end all. I don't think that has to be
because I think
a contractual interaction is simply another way of saying a voluntary interaction.
Yeah, I mean, they should be voluntary. They should be consensual. All
right. Well, I think what I'm trying to get to this is
I mean, they don't need to sign a contract and get a notary each time they interact with someone.
But I think what I would say about this is that this is a big problem that I think anarcho-capitalism has, is that I don't want to sound a bit mean, but it's not something that's very attractive to women. And if you want to have something that's going to be ultimately something that you want to have as a society, it has to be able to have some role for women. And if you're going to talk about marriage as a sort of contractual obligation, it's not going to sound very, women aren't really going to buy it. And this is my main problem, both with liberalism as well. Is that
that's currently what it is?
Well,
marriage is currently a contractual obligation, and there are also cultural things around it.
Exactly.
And that's fine. But who says those can't exist in an anarcho-capitalist society? Like, all the anarcho-capitalist says is that the contract should be voluntary, right? It should be all voluntary. There's nothing about saying, well, you can't build up some culture around it. And if a contract with some culture built up around it is acceptable, well, because it's what we've got now, then it can happen in an anarcho-capitalist society.
Perhaps I said this a bit. Go ahead, Todd.
one of the things is the problem is we all agree that the institutional initiation of force is legitimate, because there's one institution that we haven't mentioned that we have mentioned, but not in this context: the family. The family, by definition, is an institution that normalizes the initiation of force, and yet almost nobody thinks it's illegitimate.
Well, I mean, you
I
will
think
hear a lot of
I think
talk about like parenting, etc.
yeah, I think
Well,
if
but
there was a
the
family
child can't
that
consent. Consent isn't a part of the arrangement, because
Sure it can.
what do you mean? What
well, a
do you mean?
child can't consent. I mean,
To
a
what?
person to whatever's being done to him.
What do you
I
mean?
mean,
A child can
Doing
consent.
what do you advocate doing to children?
No,
Yeah,
I'm
what do you mean?
saying I'm saying that the parent-child relationship is an involuntary relationship. It's not a
Can you give an
contractual
example?
or voluntary.
Yeah,
Yeah,
your kid.
I mean,
Go ahead.
if you want to take your kid to school or to the doctor, you don't ask them, so Johnny, do you want to go to the doctor today? And then you have Johnny sign a contract. No, you put Johnny in the car and you drive him to the doctor. That's
Well, I mean, that's kind of that's a little bit of a straw man there, right? Because no one's saying that you actually have to sign a physical contract. Like, the talking about a contractual obligation is often just like implicit. Did you consent to do this thing?
All right.
And
Let's say your kid
You
doesn't want to
absolutely
go to.
can get a child to consent to things, right?
Yeah.
There is in educational psychology, there is a lot of talk about peaceful parenting is what it tends to be called by libertarian philosophers. But in educational psychology, there are a lot of methods of parenting that absolutely do allow you to get your kid to do stuff rather than physically forcing them to do stuff.
Yeah.
No, when you're 3 months old, you can't consent to whatever your parents are doing to you.
Well, that's true, but
And even when you're 3 years old, you can't consent.
yeah,
well,
sure
you kind of can, but you cannot.
But here's the thing: when you're 3 years old, when are you not consenting to
Well,
be
well, hold on.
taken
Now
care
we're
of?
getting into the distinction between voluntary consent and enforced consent. If a criminal comes to you and puts a gun to your head and says your money or your life, you technically consented to give him the money to spare your life, but that was consent under duress.
But what duress
Okay, but
are you talking about with the child?
Well, because the parents say do this or else there'll be certain penalties. Time out, don't have dessert, don't have dinner, whatever, go to bed
I mean,
early.
don't have dessert. That's not breaking the nap there, to be fair.
Well,
Like,
they
you're
would
not required to give your child dessert.
say, I know some would say spank. Well, some do and some don't. Some say spanking
I'm
is,
against spanking.
some aren't. But I remember Walter Block was on a show with Stefan Molyneux, and Molyneux was against it, and Block thought that it was, he wasn't necessarily advocating for it, but that it was within the rights of a libertarian
let's
parent to
talk.
do that.
Well, I mean, as far as forget Bach and Molyneux. I mean, what I at least think is, yeah, that spanking is against the NAP. That's abuse.
Here's the problem: this is the central problem I'd have is, all right, I don't agree with the NAP. I don't think it has any real moral weight to it. I don't think it's a valid system of morality. So how the heck am I dealt with in an anarcho-capitalist society?
Are you saying hypothetically, or are you saying you don't?
Both are true.
Okay.
Because the thing is,
well, how would you?
Let me ask.
What would
Can
happen
I ask
in
you a
anarcho-capitalist
question first?
society?
Can I have an? Can
Yeah,
I
sure.
ask? Is the non-aggression principle supposed to be essentially that, a principle, a sort of, let's use it for sake of argument, a moral standard that you want society to be held to? If it is, how is it supposed to be enforced? And if it isn't, then isn't it a law, and doesn't it violate itself? Because I almost see that the only way to enforce the non-aggression principle is through use of force.
So if someone's gonna steal my stuff and I protect myself, I've initiated force.
Oh, initiated force, but you are exerting force against them. Well,
Yes,
you could just
use
let. Well, no, you
defensive
do
force
have the option of just letting him steal from you.
Initiate force, though.
Yeah, that's the key thing for it's the initiation of force. That's what they're.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then in what way? And then how is the non-aggression principle supposed to be applied? Because that sort of goes along with my thoughts of, like, all right, I don't believe in the non-aggression principle. I'm going to, I want to have a state. I want to have I want to be able to have use of force to acquire certain things. How am I dealt with?
And then, I mean, if you want to use initiatory force against someone in an ANCAP society, and I mean, also in contemporary society, I'd expect you'd have resistance to that.
Let's say I'm very wealthy. And I offer a large sum of money for a group of private defense workers to become my own private army, and I just start. And I go into a little town or a little neighborhood, and I say, "All right, everybody in this neighborhood is now under my control. If you don't like it, you're going to get shot."
How did you get wealthy?
Let's say before the ANCAP society started, or let's say it doesn't really matter. Let's say I formed a successful business or something like that.
Okay.
So you have a successful business?
Yes. Let's say I got a lot. Let's just say. I mean, if you're for an anarcho-capitalist society, you must certainly agree that.
I can't hear you.
All right. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Let's say, in an anarcho-capitalist society, it's much easier to make money. That with no more government restrictions, businesses are very free, and people are getting lots of money. Okay, let's say I earn a lot of money through a legitimate business, selling whatever. Let's say I then turn around, use the wealth I've acquired, hire a bunch of private security workers, and go to a neighborhood and say, "You're now all under my control. If you don't agree with this, you're shot."
What about their private protection agency?
Let me
let's
just,
say I have more. Let's say I have more soldiers than they do.
I mean,
You're going to have more soldiers than the private protection agency, whose entire business model operates on having lots of soldiers?
I hire them out.
I mean, well, practically, I mean, if you made tons of money on your business, why would you suddenly go to people that are defenseless, which means they would have little resources, and how would that make you money? More money than you were making before.
Well, I think
that happened throughout history, Libertyverse. That was.
Yes,
I think you had conquering warlords who would go sack some people who were poorer than them, so they had a smaller army.
I understand that, but I'm talking about you're talking about a businessman that has a legitimate business that is making
but what if
plenty
he's really rich?
Huh?
Yeah, let's say I have
Ben,
enough money to be able to do it. But
I think the point is this. Why would somebody who's a successful businessman do that? Very simply, for prestige. It's exactly what Pompey did.
For
Not
power.
Pompey, Crassus.
To be able to exert
Crassus
raw power
private,
over other people.
Well,
yeah,
I mean, even if you take that out, I think you could still do it just for profit, and it would be totally functional.
Well, yeah,
right.
Yeah, what
just
I'm
go
saying
sack a town,
and also
take
the
their
fact
money.
that, and also I think the fatal flaw, the Achilles heel of these sort of ideologies of both Marxism and objectivism. I'm not saying Libertyverse, you're an objectivist, but the assertion that human beings are inherently rational is sort of a dangerous assumption, because there's endless examples of human beings act irrational all the time. So
yes, I do believe human beings act irrationally. I would agree with that. I think can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I think the main reason, I think because human beings act irrationally, I think that's precisely why it's important to have this rational system of morality and thus law to be, to buffer that irrationality that people have,
Yeah, and people do act in this rational self-interest like a lot of the time, right? Like the effect of human rational self-interest is rather powerful. We can see that on display with all of modern capitalism. So clearly, humans' rational self-interest is a significant part of our psychology.
And I think if we were to use that, if we're going to go back to that scenario, is when you said, well, wouldn't the private security stop me? So is this assuming that there's only one sort of private security agency? If that's the case, then they'd essentially have a monopoly on defense. So that means they can charge whatever price. Well, because if you're going to say, well, Well, you go into the neighborhood. What prevents the private security from stopping you? Well, here's the thing. What if I, to use the line from Back to the Future, kid, I own the police. What if I contracted their services to? What if I offered them enough money that they would pledge under me?
Well,
So now
the real problem here is this abstract discussion of private militaries has no resemblance to how private militaries work in the real world. Private militaries, whether they're mercenaries or the private armies of the Roman Republic, they all act in ways extremely predatory, completely opposite of the way, Hoppa's private defense agencies would work. And there's no reason to believe from the historical record that they would act any other way than they have acted since they were first invented.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And that's just the problem. The other thing is a society. Aristotle when he had 3 levels of friendship. There was the level of utility, which is what would be rational self-interest. So I've derived some sort of benefit from you, some maybe economic, maybe something else. The second level of friendship above that would be you derive pleasure from that person. Maybe they're funny, maybe they're a lover. And then the third level is what Aristotle calls the love of the soul. You love them for who they are, for the good that is in them. And now, let's forget about the state for a moment.
You could argue the second and third are the same, though.
What? No, because the third is just a kind of, you derive pleasure from them. So it's like, it's still...
You mean they
value
their
that's what deriving pleasure from being around them, isn't it?
No, the third level of friendship is where you value their own good nature independently of your own subjective wants.
Well, their virtue, right?
Yeah, their virtue. You love their virtue. So when you have a society that's constructed on the first level of friendship, that of rational self-interest, I think that I don't think that works as well as a society where the fundamental uniting principle is virtue, which is what Aristotle said would be the ideal polis, where you have society organized not according to the first level of friendship, but to the third.
Okay, well, if virtue is being moral, then a society based on that's fundamentally based on aggression, that would.
Why is that? Yeah. Why is aggression?
Be honest.
Why is the initiation of? Sorry, but this is a central point. I'm curious. All right? Why is voluntarism moral, and why is aggression immoral? Why?
Well, can I just quickly address Todd before jumping into that? Because I want to say, Todd, you sounded kind of utopian, to be honest. Then, quite ironically, you said you want a society based on everyone coming together and loving each other. It's like, yeah. But, people do have a strong sense of rational self-interest, and that's sometimes going to get in the way of it. And I'd argue a lot of the time.
Maybe I should be clear what I mean by love. The ancient Greek city-states were that was the, a completely ideal, rationally self-interested person in the abstract doesn't exist. Where we can approximate that. And a completely altruistic individual doesn't exist, but we can approximate it. But in ancient Greece and Rome, especially in the city-state level, we had this idea where the expectation was the people that were in office were organized along those lines. So the reason why that's, I think, superior to self-interest is you do things sometimes you don't want to do. You do it because it's your duty and it's the right thing to do for yourself and the community at large. If it's just a financial arrangement, as long as it doesn't make you any profit, you can just pull out whenever you want.
But the non-aggression principle doesn't preclude that sort of friendship. It's totally consistent with it. The point is that while sometimes we will act in a way that's sort of like just being nice to our friends, other times we'll act in our rational self-interest. And the non-aggression principle sort of covers when you can do that. You will never, just acting, so long as you don't violate the non-aggression principle, acting in interest of your friend, like giving your friend something for free, that's not in your rational self-interest, true, but it's also not against the non-aggression principle. So I don't see how this is really in conflict.
The natural law that's derived from the non-aggression principle isn't telling people how to act actually at all in their social interactions. It's telling them, it's forming a system of law to tell people how not to act.
But how is that system of law
speaking about the NAP. I was speaking about the libertarian and ANCAP's tendency to privilege, for human decision-making, rational self-interest over other forms of decision-making.
Well, I think no. I think the NAP is just there to govern rational self-interest because you don't really need to govern people being nice to each other.
Well, no, I know, but I'm not talking about the NAP here. I'm just saying that as a general tendency, libertarians and anarcho-capitalists tend to privilege as far as
they
human.
focus.
Yeah.
They focus on the part you actually need to govern and not on the part that you don't need to because it's fine.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole point of we're not trying to, there's no way to do it. I mean, unless you want to do it with force, but that's sort of self-defeating for the NAP.
Yeah, because
Go
again,
back to what Fritz was saying.
Yeah. So why are these things moral in the first place, or from where do these morals? Because the thing is, you could if this is supposed to be an objective idea about morality, well, then it sort of has to have a primary source. And if you still believe in moral subjectivism, well, I can just say, well, personally, I don't believe the NAP or voluntarism is moral.
Yeah, you can say that.
You could do that, but I mean,
yeah, you can say
if
that.
You're wrong. You're wrong.
Yeah, you can say that.
What determines if it's right or wrong? I mean,
well, that's a real interesting question that you were pointing to before. Like, okay, so I don't think anyone. While I don't agree that the NAP is actually like my fundamental moral principle, I think that there sometimes is a justification for the initiation of force. I do think that a lot of the time, if not the vast majority of the time, it is a good rule of thumb. I'd say it's superior to the golden rule, for example.
Well, which golden rule? Which golden rule? I mean, because
like treat others as you want to be treated.
Well, it's actually the thing is because there's the sort of there's actually a sort of stark difference is that the one that Confucius said, which was don't do unto others what you wouldn't want done unto you, and the one that Jesus said, which is do unto others what you'd want done unto yourself. Those are actually quite different because Confucius, and in that sense, your highest moral obligation is to just not be terrible to other people. And the Christian, in the one that Jesus spoke of, which was actually asserted that there are certain that you should treat others with the utmost. Essentially, what it's saying is you want to treat other people with the utmost amounts of respect, love, and compassion. And so that's an active understanding of morality. It's not passive.
I'll agree that those are both generally good rules of thumb, like the Confucian and the Jesusian, the Christian method of. We should change the religion's name to Jesusians.
Well, it's essentially the same thing because Christian is Christ follower.
Yeah, it's Christ. But in any case, I do think those are both good rules of thumb. But I would say that the NAP works a little bit better in some respects. Honestly, at this point, I think we're about to come down to a trolley problem thing, though, because we're saying, is action different from inaction? Because that's the difference between Confucius and Jesus, isn't it? Action versus inaction.
Look, my solution to the trolley problem is always, I'll pull because my favorite version of it is you pull the lever, nobody dies. You don't pull the lever, it runs over 6 people, but it does a sick loop-de-loop.
Right. Sure, that does make it tricky.
Well,
hold on a second. I want to clarify one thing real quick. As far as the third level of friendship, just so it's no misunderstanding, because I don't think I did a very good job explaining it. The idea is that a good person is a person that's mastered the virtues, and Aristotle defines the virtues as these properties, habits that one possesses that makes you an objectively better person. And so you love a person for his objectively better qualities. That's what the third level is defined as. But I think to help answer Fritz's question, how is the NAP justified? Well, the justification that I see from libertarians is that because we're self-owners, we own ourselves and therefore inherited the rights of property in our bodies. So anybody without our consent that takes advantage of our bodies is using aggression. But the problem is, I don't believe you do own yourself, and no one's adequately demonstrated that you do.
Okay, so do you think that? I mean, what do you mean as far as own? What do you mean?
Well, what do the ANCAPs mean by own?
Well, the ANCAPs, by ownership, we mean the authority to exclude or include another for that said property.
Okay,
It's
yeah,
not-
but with ownership, there's a thing you're missing. With ownership, there's a couple things here. There's the subject-object distinction. If I own a chair, a cart, a dog, or a house, the implication is that it's a relational quality between I and something else. Ownership is never identical with the owner, except in the case of self-ownership, which to me is just ad hoc and arbitrary.
Well,
Wait,
no,
what are
no,
you talking
no.
about? No,
Actually,
are you your
hold
body?
on. Wait, hold
No.
on.
Well,
Okay,
then,
wait.
then it's not identical with, because in self-ownership, the self isn't identical with the property.
No, I'm sorry, hold on. You said, am I identical to my body, right? That was your question.
Yeah, are you your body?
No, I don't think so. Okay, so no,
Yeah,
but then in that case, go ahead, Libertyverse.
Yeah, you can change the word to love, and you could make the same argument, but I think it's flawed. You can say, oh, with love there can't be self-love because there has to be a distinction between the love object and the lover, but it doesn't make any sense. Of course there can be self-love.
No, I don't think that's
just-
apples and oranges, because property.
No, no, because you can be a self-owner as well. There's no distinction. There doesn't have to be that distinction that you're making.
Oh, I just don't. Well, that seems to be the one lone exception to everything else, and that seems to be
because everything else is besides yourself. Everything else.
But let's think about this. Why does Stephen Kinsella reject the idea of intellectual property? It's an ad hoc definition of private property that doesn't conform to the normal definition of the term. And I reject the.
Sure, but I'd say that's fundamentally different from your problem there. Like, I agree, intellectual property is silly.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about there is a situation where I think that your justification for advocating property, I think that there's a limited amount of stuff. Sometimes we want the same stuff, so some stuff has to be some people's and other stuff has to be other people's. It seems pretty straightforward. However, with intellectual property, there is not a limited amount of stuff. If I use the same idea, I haven't taken anything from you.
Sure. Sure.
With the self
I think
thing,
you know, I would actually say about intellectual property.
It doesn't violate the idea of ownership. To self-own, right? Like, it has some distinction in that it's the only one where you're owning yourself. Yeah, because it's self-ownership. Like, ownership of a chair is the only one where you're owning a chair. Right, it's each type of ownership of a thing is unique, but I don't see how it violates the fundamental principle of ownership.
Well, okay, let's go back to IP, right? You said that IP violates some aspect of the definition of property, right? It's some aspect.
Sure.
Well, that's what see. People who believe in IP would say it doesn't, and that's just another valid definition of property.
Well, then they must have some different justification for property.
Yeah, well, exactly. But what I'm saying is that is exactly what the ANCAPs are doing, because they're saying
what's their justification for property that is violated?
The subject-object distinction. That's the normative that's a normative philosophical assumption entailed in the concept of private property.
Right, but even if I've already pointed out that you're not your body, but even if we ignore that, there's nothing in the subject-object distinction that says you can't be the subject and the object.
Well, I think the problem is, with intellectual property, you're not talking about, what libertarians talk about is physical property. There's the property as far as intellectual. It's pretty much an oxymoron. There's no property that is intellectual. As far as ideas can't be property. It's they're not physical.
But this isn't the only argument. No, Libertyverse. What are the legitimate means within an anarcho-capitalist society by which somebody can acquire ownership of a property? What are the legitimate means of doing that?
Of how can a person acquire ownership over other property besides
legitimately
themselves?
Yeah. Well, just property in general. Given the definition of property that you're using, what are the legitimate ways in which one can acquire property?
One can either acquire property by homesteading, by voluntary interactions.
Sure, you either get someone to give you the thing voluntarily, or you
Yeah.
get the thing yourself before anyone owns it.
Yes.
Yeah, well, the
So-
the three modes that I've heard are either you can purchase it, so a mutually agreeable transaction, you can be gifted it, or
Well, those
you
are
can
identical.
homestead it, right?
Yeah, but the gift and the purchase are kind of identical.
Well,
Yes, I
yes
mean,
and
it's
no. I
just
mean, a
based on
gift,
voluntary
I don't have to.
interaction.
If you give me something, I'm not required to necessarily pay you back. It's why it's a gift.
Well, no, but it's still voluntarily transferring property from one to another.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's a voluntary transaction, but it's a slightly different kind of transaction. But the point is this:
Granted, but what I'm saying is you can simplify it down to voluntary transaction and acquiring before anyone else has acquired.
okay,
Like
okay,
those are the
yeah.
two ways.
We'll simplify it to that. Well, in the case of before it was, well, when you're born, do you own your body, or does your parents own your body when you're a child? Because
You own your body.
okay. Well, here's the thing: you can't homestead yourself or gift yourself because you have to exist before you existed, which is a logical contradiction.
Oh,
No, you exist at the same time as you exist. So instantly as you exist and are homesteading yourself.
But no, to homestead, you already have to exist to then homestead something.
Right, and you do already exist because there is not a single second where you own yourself before you exist. And as soon as you exist, you can own yourself because you do exist.
No, but you didn't homestead yourself.
Right,
Okay,
you did instantly.
No, homesteading is where you perform an action on property. You're not performing an action on yourself.
Well, okay, but so you are acquiring it before anyone else does, is the point.
Well, so basically what you have to say then is that you're unowned until some age of intellectual responsibility where then you decide to...
No, you own yourself immediately.
Well, that's none of the three ways that were listed by the libertarian.
well, here,
Well,
the way you said it was how can a person acquire legitimate ownership, right?
Mhm, yeah.
So you've already by the question you've already it's already self-ownership is already implied because you've already said how can a person own property.
No, it's not implied because you have to...
You're not counting the person if you're asking how can a person own property.
No,
Right,
when
so
you...
can I just
wait.
quickly
When we talk
double-check
about
something?
owning something, let's say this was the argument. Well, it was in, I think, the Ethics of Liberty, where Rothbard said there are the alternatives to self-ownership. We shouldn't list all of them. As long as there's any viable alternative to self-ownership that is a rational position, then no, I don't entail self-ownership by believing that I can own something. For instance, I could be a slave and be owned by another human being, but within that arrangement, I could still then own something else. You know, within certain societies, slaves did have some personal property of their own. So they don't own themselves, somebody else owns them, but they still own
Yeah, but no one
property.
in here is Rothbard.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is, if I say that a person owns property, I does not assume that I accept the principle of self-ownership. There are many other positions, but that's what Libertyverse was
But
saying.
like,
He said,
this is
No,
what I'm
actually,
saying.
no.
Okay.
No,
Can I just quickly double check something?
Here's the thing, though. You're saying that we're not talking about just.
Oh, we lost him.
So
Libertyverse cut out. Well, you can ask your question.
Yeah. Well,
If I
what I wanted to check though,
Danny,
just
before you
was
go ahead, if I could just ask, because this is getting quite intellectual, and I'm actually very, very happy about that. Is the general idea is if there are certain means by which you come to ownership of something, if you own yourself, how do you come to own yourself?
right. Well, the two ways that this is what I wanted to double check. Third time's a charm. The two ways that you can gain ownership of an item is A, you get someone to voluntarily give you ownership of that thing when they own it, or B, you acquire something that no one currently owns and declare ownership of it. And
How do you declare ownership of yourself?
As soon as you come into existence, you implicitly own yourself, and you do exist when you exist. So before you exist, you can't own yourself. Before you exist, you can't own yourself, but as soon as you exist, you do.
Yeah, the act of existing reinforces self-ownership. It's self-evident in existence.
So are you saying, Libertyverse, that the very fact that I exist rules out all
I
other
can't-
possibilities other than self-ownership.
I'm sorry.
Are you saying that the other candidates, that were offered, either someone else owns me, like a slave master, God owns me, nobody can own anybody, including yourself? All these are other possibilities for competing with self-ownership. So, are you saying that the very fact that I exist automatically rules out all these other alternatives by de facto?
We're talking about a moral principle.
Yeah,
I
well-
don't think the point is no one else could conceivably own you under some systems. The point is it wouldn't be
Yeah.
moral to.
I'm talking about logical consistency and reason. You wouldn't be able to say, I think that person should be owned without their consent,
How do
because
they
that's
give
not
consent when they're a baby?
But
Well,
wait a minute.
Hold on. That, because what you're saying, what you would be saying, wouldn't be logically consistent from what you want done to yourself.
No, hold on a second. You're assuming that for you to say that slavery is wrong, you already have to assume self-ownership, but we're trying to demonstrate it. You can't assume what you're trying to demonstrate.
You can't assume what? My
You
internet.
can't just. Well, you're saying that. Well, these are other possibilities, but slavery is immoral. But you say that because you already believe we're self-owners. But we're trying to demonstrate that, not assume it.
It's not like that. You're basically, what I'm saying is you're demonstrating it through existence. You cannot be logically consistent and refute it, is what I'm saying.
Oh well, yeah, of course you can.
So what I'm saying is you cannot say you cannot be against self-ownership while being logically consistent. And that's
Well, of course
the fundamental
you
principle.
could say that nobody owns anybody, including themselves. That's what anarcho-communists would say, and that's an eminently internally consistent position. Whether it's true or not is another matter. But it is.
You're saying nobody owning anybody is logically consistent?
Wait, no, I want to say that there is kind of a contradiction that I see. I mean, this is a little bit strange because it isn't really my position, isn't quite perfect, Nap, but there is a logical inconsistency in saying that no one owns themselves, but everyone owns something else. So if you own something else, right, other than your body, but you do not own your body, well, your body includes your brain and all of the faculties and everything that allow you to own something. So then you don't own anything. Whoever owns you owns everything you own.
Wait, say that again.
If you don't own yourself, then you don't own anything. The person who owns you owns everything that you're saying.
Well, why was that you mentioned your brain and something? I missed that part.
Right, because if in order to own something, it requires you to have a brain. Yeah.
Okay,
that's
maybe
valid,
one, maybe one condition. There's probably other conditions, but
there's other conditions,
definitely.
but that is one of them. And if someone owns said brain, then they, in effect, own everything that you own, and you do not own any of those things because you don't actually have control over those things. They do, right? They have the ability, by the ANCAP definition, like the ability to deprive someone of use of a thing. Right? You don't have the ability to deprive someone of use of those things. The person who owns you does.
And here's the thing: there's what the other one you said, the no one can own anything, right? Is that one you said?
No, persons are not things that can be owned, either yourself or other individuals.
Okay, so you're saying nothing can be owned, but the thing is, it's impossible because there's such thing as consent. And social interaction.
Do you think, right? Wait, hold on. Do you think ownership? Do you think ownership extends to non-human organisms?
No.
Why?
They don't have a conception of ownership, surely.
Yeah.
If you don't know what ownership is, you can't own a thing.
Well, actually, animals do have a limited conception of ownership. That's why they have ranges and territories.
No, but that doesn't mean they have the conception. Just because they inhabit a physical space doesn't mean they have the conception of ownership.
Yeah, but I mean, there are some animals, specifically mostly mammals, that do have a conception of ownership to some extent, even sort of like social structures around what one ape, for example, owns and what another one doesn't. So yeah, there is that is a fair point. There are other animals that do have conceptions of ownership.
Which in caps wouldn't extend to the animal,
Yeah.
which is a contradiction.
I mean, in a way, it's difficult. I don't think it's necessarily a contradiction. You might be right that some animals can understand self-ownership, I guess. That doesn't necessarily mean a contradiction, but practically, I don't think it's very practical or even viable to know which animals can and can't do that.
Well, I mean, we can be pretty confident, for example, that like chimpanzees do have a concept of ownership. So with that, by that definition, we're violating the NAP if we cut down their forests.
We steal their bananas.
Steal their bananas.
But one thing I do want to bring up to Danny is you said that I think you said a contradiction arose by saying that if someone else owned me, that means that by implication they owned whatever I owned, and therefore there's a contradiction.
Yeah. Well, no, you can't own something else. If the things that you say you own, you do not in fact own, because you can't deprive someone of use of those things. The person who owns you can. So,
okay, so you're saying
by
the very
definition
fact,
of ownership, by the definition of ownership outlined, your owner owns everything that you pretend to own.
So what you're saying is that because he has the right to, he has the ability, is it the right or the ability to deprive me? That's, what are you getting at? Because they're not necessarily the same.
Well, I'd say the right at this point. Can
because
you
if
tell
it's
me
the
where you're going
ability
if I
to
say
deprive
right?
it, then, well, but see, the thing is, though, that doesn't follow, because there's certain, if you look at the history of slavery throughout the world, some forms of slavery, that would be the case, where the master has complete control over you and everything you own. But there are other forms of slavery. So, for instance, you know, what was common, I don't know if it's quite slavery, indentured servitude. You technically didn't own yourself; you were being rented out by somebody else. But the law just didn't allow that person to just randomly steal everything you had. You weren't chattel. So that doesn't necessarily follow. It just depends on the arrangement.
The ownership is about who has the authority to include or exclude from said property. So if you do not own yourself, if you do not have the authority to include or exclude people from your body, I guess, then you cannot own. You cannot have the authority to include or exclude from other property, extensive property from your body.
Well, hold on a second. Okay, so what you're saying is that if you don't own yourself,
one second. So you can have the ability to say let's say you're a slave and you get food, okay? And you can have that food, and your master says you can have that food. You are owned. That doesn't mean you have the authority in that situation.
okay, so to be clear, there's something I don't agree with. You seem to be saying that if I don't own myself, therefore I don't have the right or the authority to exclude other people from using my body or my possessions. That doesn't follow at all. There's no innate contradiction between holding the saying that I have right of exclusion and holding to some other definition than self-ownership.
I'm not sure what you're saying.
I think we're starting to get to grind to a standstill on this point, because I'd still like to go back to the my point about, you know, hiring a private army and conquering a territory. So I think Todd, Danny, and Libertyverse, in respective order, give your final points on this specific issue of self-ownership. And Sarma has joined.
Oh, wait, who's first? Was I first?
Yeah, you are, Todd. You are, Todd.
Yeah, the point is that nobody's demonstrated that that self-ownership is the only possible alternative. See, because there's two ways you can prove something to be true, right? You look at all the logical alternatives and disprove all the other logical alternatives. Rothbard tried to do that, but failed by failing to consider all the other logical alternatives. And as long as there's other logically viable positions, then it's not the default. You have to then give other reasons why those alternatives are false, and that's not been satisfactorily done. In fact, because many of those alternatives haven't even been recognized.
Okay. Liberty. Danny, you can explain your final point on this.
I'll make sure I went after that because I have a couple of things on that.
Yeah, that's fine.
So the concept of ownership, first of all, it can be a little bit more complex, and that's the first. That's actually somewhere where I do tend to start deviating from anarcho-capitalists, because you can have sort of concepts of partial ownership, temporary ownership, and you can have like a collective ownership of a thing. Like these are all logically consistent ideas where you have some rights to something, but not total rights to it. And that's kind of what you end up getting with the slavery example. So if we were to consider ownership as a very simple thing, as I believe anarcho-capitalism tends to look at it, although Libertyverse might correct me, if we look at it as a simple thing, then I do think that there is a logical inconsistency with the idea that, for example, everyone could own, like that if you're owned by someone else, right, that you could own anything. Because I think if you're owned by someone else and you're using the simple definition of ownership where they own you completely, well, then they own your brain, and they can control any of your decisions, including your decisions about your own property. And if you say they can't do that, then they only kind of partially own you, and it's a more complex system of ownership.
Okay.
All right, that's fine. Yeah, wrap it up. As for the concept of the base thing, like how do you own yourself? My real defense of it would be a little bit different, which is that self-ownership isn't sort of my fundamental moral principle. It's more of a pragmatic one, in that I think that we can sort of maximize the freedom of a society by saying just that you own yourself. And for various reasons, I think that freedom is a morally positive thing.
Okay, Libertyverse, your final thoughts on this specific topic?
Yeah, just to I think for an ending note on this topic, about the ownership or partial ownership, that stuff. I think like Danny, what Danny was saying, I think he was more talking about possession. As far as ownership, you can have many people owning, let's say, one person. Sorry, I hear an echo. You can have many people owning one person, but you can't have one person. That one person cannot be partially owned. It's a dichotomy. You may have the ability to do things, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have the authority to decide that.
Okay. All right. And all right. If I could give my 2 cents on this, I think from what I've heard, I think I'm actually going to have to rewatch this part again, because I thought it was very, very engaging. But I would say that the problem is that if human beings are property, then it might make sense to own them. And if they're not, then self-ownership seems to be somewhat contradictory. But anyways, moving on from that, would Saruman, the guitar-playing wizard, like to give any statements regarding this specific issue before we move on to my understanding of how more criticizing the anarcho-capitalist society?
All right. First of all, I don't appreciate any difference between ownership and possession. To me, these are synonyms. Second of all, I don't make any distinction between the person and the body of the person.
Okay, Fritz, it's not fair to cut it off right now. Those are two really good points to follow.
Okay.
It's not fair, man. Those are points that...
I'm sorry, but just the clock is running down, and Danny has said he'd have to leave in a short while. But
Well, you asked. You asked if I had any
I
thoughts.
did, but I didn't intend on reviewing these in the
We'll
first
have to do
place.
this again.
We will. We can do it on another person's channel sometime. But to get back to more sort of the practical problems I'd have with the NAP and just the fact that I don't understand how it's supposed to be reliably enforced is. So again, the example I've used is, let's say I've gained a large amount of wealth, and using that wealth, I buy up a very large amount of security forces, of my own, essentially a private army, and I use that army, and I of course bribing them with loot and plunder, and positions of power within a new society that I'm going to build. I go to these little towns and villages and communities and neighborhoods in this anarcho-capital society, and I essentially take them over. I, enslave the women and children, kill the men that resist, and now I'm basically I've set myself up as a king. What meaning or what worth does the NAP have in that instance? How is that supposed to protect anybody?
Fritz, you sound like you just were Julius Caesar right there.
I bloody am. No, I'm bloody. No, what are you talking about? I'm Clovis.
No, but that's exactly what Julius Caesar did to come to power. That's what I mean.
That either that or I'm someone like Attila the Hun or
Surprised to meet somebody else who knows who Clovis is.
Clovis was the cornerstone of modern Western civilization. He's the
Absolutely.
But we'll get into that at another time. So yes, so my question is, how do you enforce the NAP, and how do you prevent that situation, which is possible under a anarcho-capitalist system in which you can purchase military strength? How do you prevent that from happening? And how do you protect people's rights?
I mean, you're basically talking about warring states.
How do you prevent states from arising?
By being vigilant with liberty and trying to stop it at its earliest time. It's always going to be a problem to preserve liberty, and people will always want to trample on it.
Yes. Let's say I want to. How do you stop me from doing it?
I'm not.
And it's like how would you prevent me from? Because the thing is, here's the thing: if you're going to operate under the non-aggression principle, then let's say the town and everybody that they let's say I have let's say again, let's just say I'm a cartoonish villain. I have a little castle on a mountaintop, and it's always dark and stormy there. And there's this peaceful little village down in the countryside or whatever, and they're all living a perfect little ANCAP life. They've all got AR-15s and weed farms, and they party all the time. But and let's say they know that I'm buying an army. I'm purchasing private security forces, and they know that I have enough money that they would not be able to withstand me if I attacked them. How would they prevent me from attacking them in the first place, if not through initiation of force?
So you're saying that you already have made the threat against them?
Well, let's say let's say it's sort of it's like in Lord of the Rings, where they see Saruman creating an army. Let's say
thousands of jobs.
Yes, thousands of jobs. But yes,
and it's for the purpose of
creating a state. I want to create a state,
and it is for the purpose of pillaging them, plundering them.
Well, not just that. I would take them over, and I would integrate them into this new state. They're going to be the peasant class. So essentially, and they keep seeing tanks and armored cars and helicopters and just soldiers marching up to my giant castle or state or whatever. And so they essentially know, and they can predictably understand that I'm most likely going to invade them and take away their freedom or whatever. How are they supposed to stop me without violating the NAP? Because is a preventative measure okay under the NAP?
I'd say threat of force is an initiation in itself. When you see a guy mugger come up to you on the street and point a gun at your head, he doesn't need to pull the trigger for you to defensively act.
Well, I don't have to kill them. They can all just submit.
What constitutes the threat of force? Is the existence of the military itself a threat of force? And if not, when does it become a threat of force?
I guess
We already have a distinction. To point out, we already have a distinction for that in modern law. I mean, there's a point where someone is, threatening you. That is already illegal.
Okay, so that's good that we have law then.
We're
yeah.
speaking of
Well, yeah, but I
military.
mean,
That
if, we,
can be
if the
enforced
courts
through a
can
government.
figure it out currently,
Wait,
then
we're not
surely it's not
speaking
that
of
big of a
individual
problem for
things.
the ANCAPs morally.
Wait, yeah, who here's against law again?
We're not speaking of individual conflicts here. We're
I'm
speaking
not against law. I would just create my own system of law.
No, that's what I'm saying. And if you're gonna create your own system of law where with positive law where people can plunder and pillage, there's gonna be
Resistance to it. Okay,
there's gonna be
so
resistance. And if you're successful, then you're successful like you are now.
okay, so that demonstrates that would then demonstrate that anarcho-capitalism can't sustain itself
that
because
doesn't
somebody.
invalidate but it doesn't invalidate the how it's moral or not.
I don't care if it's moral or not. It doesn't really matter. It like the old adage goes, it doesn't matter who's right. It matters who's left.
So wait, wasn't
I like that.
wait, wasn't it you or maybe it was Todd that was talking about a moral system?
Well, we're just talking about a hypothetical here. I abhor violence. I would never. I hope I never have to where I have to kill another person. But there are people that would. There are people that don't agree with me. And my question is that I ultimately think that having a state and having community, and having some formal military as a way to enforce the law, as a way to initiate force, is a perfectly acceptable sacrifice to make sure that scenario could never happen.
And then we just get back to the funding because okay,
I'm perfectly fine. I consent to the taxation. No, look. This is the way I see it. There's a little picture I've seen once where it shows a man representing the government going, "I consent." Then it shows a little picture of the taxpayer going, "I consent." Then it shows us a picture of a screaming person with the yellow and black flag going, "I don't consent." And the thing is. So you don't consent to taxation, right?
Well, taxation by definition is non-consensual, but I can wait, hold on. I can consent to services, just like I want.
If let's say we live in a representative republic, or we live in a system where in theory, effectively. The people are in control of the government, and under what I'd want, they would have even more control because government would be much more localized. And I think democracy
That's a little misleading. The people are controlling the government, right? But not all of the people will agree on everything it does.
And that's why you're supposed to have
49% of people.
And that's why you would have something like the Bill of Rights, which is supposed to protect the rights of the people who don't agree, so that you don't have.
Yeah, but you're always going to have some. From a moral perspective, you will always have some things which some people do not consent to if you have a government. If that's not the case, well, then the government is just a company, and you could just have a company.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
That's.
Then why can't you just have a government? I don't understand the difference.
Well, essentially, that's what a government is. It's a It's an organization. It's actually, when you boil down all the social services which are, forced upon us, you're forced to pay for them. What it is essentially a protection racket. It's a protection racket that has a monopoly on force. Now, the issue with a protection racket is not the racket itself. It's competition from various rackets.
Well, the point is, if I don't want to. Because what you're saying as a distinction between taxation and paying for certain services, the distinction is exactly that one is collectivized and one is services.
In a democratic system, you vote. Your consent. You're contracting the service of something like the police through voting. You're voting for candidates. And also, I would say that because again, I absolutely believe that having a publicly funded, having a taxpayer-funded police system that ensures that everybody, regardless of their ability to pay, has a reliable and has a reliable way of ensuring that they are going to be protected internally from crime, and an army and a military to defend themselves externally, because you haven't figured out how that's supposed to work, because your ANCAP society doesn't have to be destroyed by a wealthy person from within. It could just be another country wants to invade you, and oh look, you don't have a unified military to defend yourselves. You don't have any organized military, because that's not generally a threat for the ordinary person. They didn't think of that. So the fact is,
well, any country can be invaded, ANCAP or not.
Yes, but it's generally a bit harder to invade a country that actually has an army than one that doesn't.
You actually have to demonstrate that.
What?
Well,
You have to demonstrate that. You can't just assert that.
Why?
Wait,
Well,
what are you asserting,
I mean,
Fritz?
we're talking about
I'm asserting that an ANCAP society won't have any
have a stronger military.
I don't think you would have a very competent, or I don't think you would have a very effective military force, because it would be,
we've never had an anarcho-capitalist society yet, but what we have had are stateless societies, and it is a
they
historical
don't last
fact.
very long.
They don't last very long. States just curb
Yeah,
stomp.
I think one of the better modern
That's fair.
examples is
Or they become states.
well, one of the better
well,
examples is Spain during the Civil
Then you become
War,
part of the state.
and what happened to them? Well, Franco took them all over. But yeah. Anyways, my point is that if I honestly don't really, at the point in which if we're going to talk about collectivism versus individualism, I'm perfectly fine with certain amounts of collectivism, because I do generally believe that there is such a thing as the common good, and I think that and that's essentially been that's one of the cornerstones for early Western civilization, as in the res publica is the common good, the commonwealth, as it were. And the fact is that I really don't care if you don't like the fact that people have to pay tax. They have to pay taxes in order to protect other people via police force and the military.
What you're saying is you have a morality that is not ultimately based on liberty.
You are.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're not. So
I'm not a
I'd
liberal,
say that-
and I'm not a libertarian.
Well, hold on a second,
in
real
that case, fundamentally, though, I kind of can see some pragmatic use for some things that resemble collectivism, but fundamentally, on a moral level, a collective is only useful insofar as it serves the individual. Any kind of group, I think, should be voluntary.
I don't ultimately think the individual is a source of morality.
Oh, okay. Well, then that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah, I mean that's the sort of thing where it ultimately came down to is like, the sort of thing. Well, me and Todd have been holding back is the fact that me and Todd would both identify as Christians, and that's a whole other can of worms here. So I thought, that is sort of the reason why I kind of wanted to cut short the idea of self-ownership, is that I think for our purposes of discussion, it'd probably be a little more productive to discuss it on the practical grounds, because if me and Todd are both religious and you guys aren't, that's obviously a very vast difference in terms of how we're going to view morality.
Well, there's an issue with classical liberalism and what we commonly term right-wing libertarianism, is that it's ultimately built on top of Calvinism. It's ultimately built on top of Protestantism, and in fact, it's a very poor understanding of Protestantism, but it is built on top of that. A lot of what the classical liberals and the libertarians and the anarcho-capitalists believe no longer makes sense when you take away the God, which is why they're trying to fall back on practicality.
Well, I mean,
I'm not trying to fall back on practicality. I just understand.
No, not you.
Okay.
So Sinclair, you're channeling the Twilight of the Idols there, huh?
Excuse me?
You said you're channeling Twilight of the Idols there, huh?
I don't know what that means.
That's where Nietzsche wrote that without the Christian God, Christian morality disappears, and there's no justification for it.
Well,
Yes, we can hear
then
you.
Nietzsche, if that's what Nietzsche said, Nietzsche was correct.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought you were doing.
I absolutely think Christians and traditionalists should
I'm
be
not a Christian.
Nietzsche,
Go ahead.
because
sorry.
he was absolutely right about a lot of things. But go ahead, Libertyverse. What were you going to say?
Sorry. Yeah. What was I gonna say? I think I mean, as far as to what St. Clair said about falling back on practicality, I mean, this whole time, I think I've been the one wanting to talk about principles, because the fact is, and this goes to something that you guys implied in what Danny said, is that the ends justify the means, but the fact is that the ends can only justify the means in hindsight, when you know the exact cause and effect of what happened. But in reality, you can't.
All right. Just want
On
to
an
say,
individual
since
level,
Danny has to
you
go.
can't know that.
Since Danny has to
So
go. Or sorry. Since Danny has to go, I'd just like to say goodbye to him first. So bye. Oh, he just left. Sorry about that.
see
Go
ya.
ahead, Libertyverse.
No, I mean, I think I said it. Yeah, basically, you can't have, you can't say I base my I base how I want things to go on the ends justifying the means, when you can only see the ends in hindsight.
Libertyverse, can I ask you a question? And in fact, this was the question that I
You
wanted
guys.
to ask you, that I wanted to come in here for, but haven't had the chance to until now. How do you think that man behaves in a state of nature?
Who
I'm
are you
curious.
talking to?
Libertyverse.
Oh, okay, thanks. How does man act in a state of nature?
Yes. How do you think that man behaves in a state of nature?
I mean, this is a generality, but I guess a truth about man's nature is that they act to achieve ends.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very safe answer.
Well, what kind of answer are you looking for?
I expected you to say something along the lines of the common classical liberal / libertarian mentality, which is that man in a state of nature is an ultimately social animal, that he behaves in a way in which he cares for his fellow man in the abstract.
I think that's a possibility, but I was talking, I mean, I figured you were asking me about a truth of man's nature. And a truth of man's nature is that he acts to achieve ends. And what you just said about being a social animal isn't necessarily a truth of all of man's nature. It's, you know,
I agree.
on an individual level, yeah, sure, there's
Well,
people that are social animals, and there are people that aren't, right?
Well, I take the Hobbesian view.
Okay. Since I think we can start wrapping up, Todd has to go soon as well. I think let's all give our final thoughts. I'll go first in terms of how, my thoughts is, I still ultimately think that in terms of morality, I disagree with the NAP as the ultimate, and individual freedom as the ultimate source of morality, as something that society ultimately should be founded on, and that is not just the reason as to why I'm not an ANCAP on moral grounds, but also why I'm not a liberal or a libertarian. That's why I consider myself a traditionalist. And I think on practical grounds, I think that certain state services are absolutely more practically available, are more practical to use than they are than they would be in private hands. And I'm absolutely deathly afraid of certain things, such as private security, such as defense and use of force. It's the idea of use of force itself being in private hands. And I ultimately think that it is not immoral to be able to initiate force in certain circumstances. So, Todd, would you like to go next?
Yeah. Since this has pretty much mostly been about private security, I would say the two things about it is A, libertarians postulate private military actors that have never actually existed in history. All observable historical accounts of private military actors have been exactly the opposite of what anarcho-capitalism would demand, which is why I'm very skeptical of it.
Well, is it my turn?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Oh, okay. I mean, as just a last response, I think I've been trying not to speculate too much. I am more focused on the principles. I think that should determine what should be, as opposed to
Practicality.
In a way, because we don't know how events affect other events, and exactly, and we can't necessarily take them as I guess rule of the future that's going to happen. So we should
I get it.
do
I
this
get it. Yeah,
policy or that
I get it.
policy.
I get it. You don't
Um,
think that we should make predictions about the future based on our information about the past?
And that's again why I'm a traditionalist, because I
no,
understand
no, no,
what
no.
works.
No. I think you can make collective. I think you can make collective predictions about the future. I don't think you can make predictions about the future on an individual human action level, because ultimately that'll create a system where you're initiating force against individuals.
Okay. St. Clair, would you like to, or I guess you have you're gonna sort of restart a new YouTube thing under the moniker, under a new moniker, right?
Yeah, I'm going to go under the name The Happy Mask Salesman.
And the picture has to be the happy merchant, okay? But dressed as the happy mask salesman. But please
I don't
give
know
us some, do you know the Jewish merchant guy, the guy rubbing his hands, but
Oh, okay.
somebody needs to draw him as the happy mask salesman. But anyways,
I would love that.
would you like to give your final thoughts?
No, I don't think I was in here long enough. I think I said
Okay.
pretty much what I wanted to say.
Okay, well then, the nuts to you then. But yeah, I think ultimately I would say I think. Well, okay. First off, I think it's great that none of us managed to have to use the Rhodes joke because it's funny, but it should be saved for the end of these debates. It's like. But I would say that I think this is actually a very productive debate. I think you're good. I think we actually had a good dynamic in which, because I was a bit afraid when I heard that Danny wasn't actually a real ANCAP, but he managed to be able to sort of go in and out and be able to agree with you, but not be explicitly, on the exact agreeing 100% with you.
He was a frenemy.
And I've noticed that I have to say this to the chat. You've been specific. You've been very, very not cancerous. It's fantastic. I love it. Congratulations to the chat. You're great.
I think it has very much to do with the type of audience that you attract.
No. A lot of my streams have been cancer, but I think it's the topic because people have been engaging a lot of debate on the side chat. I was talking on this stream, but I think this actually ended up being a very good format. I think it's due to certainly the people being able to respect each other and not interrupt a lot. I mean, I did it a couple times, but I think it was pretty good. And the fact that there was only 4 or 5 of us. So I think with all that said, have a good night, everyone. See you later.